Firstly, can I acknowledge the Indigenous people, both past and present, and thank them for allowing us to have this event here tonight. I'd like to welcome all of you here. There's quite a diverse group of people here, as always with CURF. For those who this is the first time, CURF is very committed to strengthening links between research, the research community, public policy, and the regional community. And I'm really delighted that tonight's about business. We've had some very distinguished academics speak, people from leaders in the community, and tonight, very importantly, it's the business sector, and I hope the foundation for a strong partnership with CURF in the future. I'd like to welcome all of you, and particularly our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Francis Shannon, who's been not only a supporter, but a financial supporter, which we love, and in a position to really support myself, particularly here at the university. So I'm really, really very grateful for that. Minister Corbell was coming tonight, but as you imagine, it's a very busy time right now in the ACT Assembly, and at the very last moment, business has called him away, so he gives his apologies. He's also been a very strong supporter of CURF. This is the third CURF seminar for this year. We tend to have 4 flagship seminars, and I'm also delighted to say that CURF seminars, the series, will be part of the flagship series for the centennial next year. So that's a recognition of the way this has been going. I think that's probably all from me, except to thank, of course, the crew my crew and the people at the Climate Institute at ANU for helping organise tonight. They always do an excellent job. So I'd like to welcome Francis Shannon to introduce our guest speaker tonight.
Thank you, Barbara. I too would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Ngunnawal people, on which we are meeting tonight. And I'd like to welcome you all here to the University of Canberra for this CURF seminar. It's a pleasure to be introducing Chris Faulks from the Canberra Business Council to speak tonight. But before I do that, I would just like to say a couple of things about the university and about CURF in particular. The University of Canberra has a lot to be proud of at the moment. In 2007, it set some very ambitious goals, and it has achieved many of those goals in the last 5 years. We now provide education to more than 10,000 students in Canberra, not all from Canberra, but they're in Canberra, up from about 6,000 5 years ago. But in the process of increasing our student numbers, we've also maintained and increased the satisfaction of those students to the point where we have now been ranked 7th in the country on good teaching scales for the last 2 years. So that's a big jump again on the quality of our education, and goes to the fact that we have been able to increase our student numbers and still maintain quality education. And our graduates are highly employable. In the Good Universities Guide, we continue to be rated as 5 stars for employability. In our research area, we've also had major achievements. We have employed a cohort of new research active academics, some of whom are here tonight in areas such as health, education, public policy, economic modelling, and of course urban and regional planning, where CURF sits. And we've also doubled our research income in the last 5 years, which against stiff opposition from many universities is quite a big achievement. We're also very proud of the fact that the research that we do has impact in the community, has impact with government, has impact in policy, is not purely academic research, but addresses issues of importance of the day, both in our community and in government and in industry. Canberra Urban and Regional Futures, or CURF, is an important part of this development of research and development of our interactions with government, business and community organisations in Canberra and in the region, not just in Canberra but in the capital region. It focuses on research and education in the context of urban and regional planning, sustainability, environmental change, human health and many other issues. It's been a great entity for bringing people together within the University of Canberra, but also across the two universities in Canberra, the University of Canberra and the ANU, with Will and Barbara leading CURF very ably from both institutions. But it has also then engaged with the community, it's also engaged with the ACT government and with local and regional governments in a very strong and positive manner. It's nearing its second birthday now, and so for its 2 years of existence, it's had quite a big impact. And there are a number of projects in which it's involved in the region and in the ACT. And the Department of Regional Australia, Regional Development and Local Government, funds one such project in capacity building within that department. And last year, this led to an initiative, a very successful regional symposium at Batemans Bay, where local, state, ACT and Commonwealth agencies were involved. And the local community and the business community in that area were all involved in this regional symposium. CURF is also working with the ACT government on a scoping study for a regional knowledge portal, which will bring together information on socioeconomic and environmental indicators for the region to assist in planning at the local, state and regional level. So it has achieved a lot and is involved in a lot of activities that are very valuable in bringing researchers together with the community and with business and with the regional areas around Canberra. So the speaker tonight is Chris Faulks. Chris has been CEO of the Canberra Business Council since 2007. Prior to that, she was General Manager, Public Affairs and Government Relations with Diabetes Australia. And she spent, prior to that, 10 years working as a senior advisor to federal government ministers responsible for many portfolios: education, science and training, health and ageing, family and community services. So she's across all areas of government, it would seem. She was also Chief of Staff to the President of the Senate. Tonight, Chris is going to talk about business opportunities in the region. This is a very important topic for not only for the university, but for the community and for the ACT in general. So, guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Chris Faulks to give this talk.
Thank you, Frances. You've got a new podium here, which is, I prefer the ones with the thing in the front so you can wriggle around a little bit. I'm delighted to be here tonight. Before I start, I'd like to also acknowledge the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet this evening, the Ngunnawal people. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and thank them for the continuing contribution they make to our community. Thank you, Barbara and Will, for inviting me to speak this evening at this CURF seminar. And welcome to friends of CURF from government, academia, the community and the business sector. I must say that when Barbara asked me to speak tonight, I actually said no, not because I didn't want to speak, because I think CURF is fantastic, but because I'm in the middle of writing an 85-page annual report that was supposed to be at the printers today. So when my phone rang all day today from the printers, I just ignored it, just switched it off and thought I'll get to that tomorrow. I meant what I said when I said before that CURF is a fantastic body. I think it's been extraordinarily successful in the last 2 years as a collaboration between the University of Canberra, Urban and Regional Planning Discipline, and the Australian National University Climate Change Institute. It's become, I think, an important forum for information sharing across organisations in the Canberra region, information about urban and regional planning, sustainability and climate change. I hope my talk this evening makes a small contribution to that information sharing. Before I get into the main part, I'd like to just speak briefly about myself and Canberra Business Council. For those of you, Frances has already introduced me, but I'm the CEO of Canberra Business Council. I've held that position for the last 5 years, and whilst I'm not an eminent academic, actually, when I researched this speech and I went through the people that have spoken before me, I thought, this is not going to be good. But anyway, life's a challenge. So But I am pleased to be able to contribute to the important dialogue being led by CURF. And I'm not sure whether it gives me any extra brownie points, but I'm actually alumni of both ANU and UC, so that's got to count for something. A few words about Canberra Business Council. Canberra Business Council provides business leadership in the promotion of sustainable economic and business development of the ACT and region by providing forums, representing the interests of business to government, leading or participating in key initiatives, and providing services to our members. By way of background, though, what is now known as Canberra Business Council began in 1979 as the Committee of 22. And I just want to point out that the Committee of 22 was all males. There were actually 24 of them, but somebody couldn't count. So it's just an interesting thing, isn't it, that you actually call your organisation something when it doesn't actually represent the truth. It came together when 22 industry bodies decided to promote the private sector and economic growth in Canberra and the region at a time when Canberra was even more heavily dominated by the public sector than it is today. It's hard to imagine, but at that time there was virtually, a small and vibrant private sector, but it was basically ignored. And obviously at that time the Territory had no voice in determining its future or what went on here. So the council in its early days lobbied the federal government very heavily around planning and land use. Less than a year after it was established, however, the Committee of 22 recognised the importance of the region and changed its name to the Canberra Association of Regional Development, CARD, which was quite well known at the time. Then in 1991, the organisation changed its name again to Canberra Business Council, but again retained its focus on regional development. The council has had a strong regional focus since its inception. The Queanbeyan City Council was a foundation member, and the board has retained a position ever since 1979 for a regional representative, and currently that position is filled by the Mayor of Queanbeyan. Some people would assume that as a business organisation, the council might be reluctant to engage in dialogue and initiatives that have a sustainability focus. Phrases like raping and pillaging, corporate greed come to mind. The reality is that just as the council recognised the importance of Canberra being part of the region, so too it understood from the beginning that a sustainable economy can only exist where there are sustainable businesses and business practices. In fact, sustainable economic development has been a priority of the council since it began. More recently, this has been evidenced by the council's partnership with the Conservation Council in 2008 to work with the ACT government to commission a study into light rail. Similarly, the council has championed high-speed rail for 2 decades. You'd think that we'd learn, wouldn't you? Recognising the economic and the environmental benefits of high-speed rail to Canberra and the region. More recently, we've proposed the Digital City Initiative, which has potentially significant implications for our innovative business community here, identifying some of the problems and coming up with solutions. We have partnerships with the RDA, thank you, Robert. And just last week we had Simon Crean to speak at one of our lunches on regional issues. So, having said that, I just want to encapsulate what the Council's vision for Canberra and the region is. It's one of a built environment that is sustainable, a city that leads the country and the world in livability, a public transport system that is efficient, sustainable and highly utilised, regional transport that is fast and efficient, energy that is renewable, water supply that is secure, an urban forest that breathes and cools our city, cutting-edge ecotourism and active living around local shops, safe walking and bicycle paths. So our vision, and I did have a slide which I didn't bring, is about high-speed rail, light rail, solar, 8-star buildings and everything else that goes with it. Now on to the main part of my talk tonight. The main proposition I'm putting is that business, the private sector, is an integral part of the solution to Canberra and the region's sustainable future. It is not the problem. The three sub-themes of my presentation are that there are a range of significant challenges facing our region, climate change being potentially the major risk, but just one of a number of challenges, including demographic changes, peak oil, water and energy security, food security, and others. But each of these challenges also opens up opportunities for research and business to find solutions. The second theme is that Canberra has some unique competitive advantages that position it well to be a leader if we act decisively in developing, commercialising and exporting solutions to the risks that we face. And the third thing is that we have our best chance of meeting the challenges that lie ahead if we do it together. And that's really why I was so keen to be here tonight. If we share a common vision, harness our collective strengths and capabilities, and enter into long-term partnerships across research, government, the private sector and the community, we have a good chance of actually finding the solutions and solving our problems. So I don't intend tonight to go into the detail about the challenges of climate change or the other risks. Professor Stefan, I think at one of your previous talks went into that in great detail. I'm taking as a given that climate change is happening, that it's causing sea level rises, greater frequency of extreme weather events, including high temperatures, rainfall extremes, bushfires, etc. That demographic change, including population growth and ageing population and migration, are putting increasing pressures on our services and our taxation systems, and that we face challenges from, as I said before, peak oil, water and energy security, food security, digitisation of our economy. I don't know how many of you have got teenage and early 20s kids, but it's actually quite difficult now to have a proper meal without games and text messages. And in fact, just last week, I stopped serving the meal and sat down, and everyone went on with their little machines and whatnot, and didn't notice me for quite some time, really. It was a bit of a shock. And finally they said, "What's wrong with you, Mum?" And I said, "I'm not sitting at the dining room table with all of this equipment, including, I might tell you, my husband's iPad, because he likes to sort of check facts in the middle of the conversation at the dinner table." So I said, "No, we're out. This is all going." And that's to say nothing of the ongoing challenges of health, affordable housing, transport, education, services, maintaining economic vitality, etc. And I think if we look at that list, it could be quite depressing. Except for the business community, it's not depressing at all, because I don't know how well you know the business community, but they're very adept at looking at challenges and seeing opportunities and then developing a new industry or a new business around those opportunities. I agree with Professor Stefan that we pretty much understand the problems. Now we really need to focus on the solutions. These will require strategies for both mitigation and adaptation across our planning systems and our built environment, our transport systems, our farms, factories, in fact across every aspect of our lives. And here's where the business community comes in. Business, or the private sector, can help find the solutions to these challenges. Just ask yourself, who will design and build improved buildings that will cope with heat waves, cyclones and flooding? The private sector. And it will be the private sector that will redesign our infrastructure, roads and railways to withstand storms and flooding. It will be the private sector that will design our early warning systems, our emergency management systems. They will also design more secure water and energy systems. And the private sector, the farmers, will have to adopt change agricultural practices to secure our food supplies and adapt to climate change. The second point, though, or the sub-point, is that the business community can't do this in isolation. To meet these challenges, we need the private sector, but we need the private sector working with research institutions, government and the community to find and implement solutions. So if there's no other message that you take home tonight, that's it. We need the business community in the team, but they have to do it as a team. And as I said before, the good news is that all of these challenges provide opportunities for innovation, for industry adaptation and capability building, for new industries, for research institutions to work with the private sector on solutions. I think the real challenge for Canberra and the capital region now is to harness the opportunities inherent in responding to climate change and to the other threats that we face, and to leverage off our distinctive competitive advantages to find solutions and then develop industry capabilities and exports around those solutions. The majority of the private sector in Canberra and the region gets it. Some don't, but the majority do. They understand that action on climate change is not only good for the future of our planet, it's good for business. Look at the Nishi building and the other commercial buildings around town that are looking at 6, 7, 8 Green Star. The innovation around wind farms, Wind Lab, and solar power, the mushrooming of ecotourism industry, and even down to things like farmers' markets where people are increasingly conscious of sourcing their food locally. There's a rich vein of opportunities in this region and an innovative private sector champing at the bit to meet the challenges. It reinforces that innovative companies and resilient communities make for strong regions, which in turn make for a strong nation. Economic diversification is the key. Economic diversification that builds on the strengths of Canberra and the region. And I just want to take a little diversion here, just go off on a little tangent for a minute. And talking about the challenges and opportunities, everyone's agreed that public transport must be a critical part of any strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and respond to climate change. In this context, I agree with Minister Corbell, who spoke to CURF recently and said that there was a real and yet unexploited opportunity for brownfield infill and urban densification in our town centres and along our transport corridors, the transport corridors that connect our 5 town centres. This densification could facilitate land value capture along transport corridors, and if approached reasonably, and I stress that, so if, for example, governments think they're going to make a fortune out of this, then it's not going to work. But if it's done properly, that land value capture could provide some of the resources required to develop a more efficient public transport system for the future, something like light rail. ACT, in 2008, and this is an interesting little part of the aside, in 2008, Canberra Business Council partnered with the Conservation Council to lobby the ACT government to undertake a study into the feasibility of light rail. That was quite interesting. It caused a little bit of a stir amongst people in the business community who really weren't sure that the business community should be partnering with the Conservation Council. But my approach is that I think partnerships are the way to go, and you'd be surprised at how much commonality of interest there is when you get down to the nitty-gritty. PwC tendered and won the tender process, and we supported the outcome. The submission found that a light rail system would meet the goals of economic development, sustainability and social inclusion, as outlined in the Canberra Plan, the Integrated Transport Framework, the ACT Climate Change Strategy and other policy documents, of which we have many. It found that a light rail system supported by a bus feeder network would maximise transport accessibility, significantly improve the efficiency of the ACT's transport system and minimise the social and environmental impacts of transport. It would potentially decrease Canberra's traffic congestion and people's commuting time and increase productivity. Finally, it concluded that light rail would provide opportunities to make Canberra more sustainable by increasing greener transport choices, reducing car reliance and encouraging a more sustainable urban form built around transit corridors. But guess what? Nothing happened for 3 years. Fast forward to the City to Gungahlin Transit Corridor study, which the Council is quite supportive of in principle. But we found that the concept design report had significant inadequacies and did not provide sufficient information, detailed costings or financing options upon which to base a decision between bus rapid transit and light rail transit. The point I'm making here is that, and I'll coin a phrase a little bit later on, what we tend to do in Canberra is do lots of reports with lots of glossy photographs, we consult to death, and then it sits on a shelf. And I think we've got to move beyond that. If we're going to address the issues that we face with climate change and demographic changes, we've really got to get serious about doing the proper research and study in the first place and then acting on it. So we've made some recommendations about the Gungahlin to the city transit corridor. As I said, in principle, we're very, very supportive of that. If you look at what could happen along Northbourne Avenue, again, in terms of redevelopment, densification and infill and land value capture, and I should say, you can do that along the transit corridors and around town centres without the angst that happens in Canberra sometimes when you're trying to densify some of our suburbs. So we're supportive and we anxiously await the next report or the next stage of the study, which we hope will have a bit more detail in it. In terms of transport, the reality is that we live in a suburban, low-density city. While we talk about increasing density, there are substantial barriers to achieving this outcome. A large number of Canberra residents do not want change to the urban form, especially if it involves significant densification, and there are planning, regulation and taxation impediments to infill developments and densification. Let me just give you an example. The government's stated policy objectives is for densification and infill. These very policy objectives are undermined by the lease variation charge, which actively discourages developers from developing in certain areas. So you've got two parts of the government, one at a high level saying this is what we want brownfield development, we want infill, and you've got another part saying we're going to put these lease variation charges on, perhaps with the right intentions, but usually misunderstanding how the private sector operates. And when the disincentives are put in place, it's not that they are jumping up and down, but they just don't do it. And so if you look at what's happened now, there's a major shortfall in the expected revenue from the lease variation charge. So governments need to remove the silos and ensure that there is alignment of policy objections and regulation. And I can talk to you about that. In fact, I've just come from one of our red tape regulation sessions. If you look, for example, at the government has a policy of a lively outdoor cafe scene in Canberra, so that, you know, when visitors come here, it looks as if we actually do things. And yet there are regulations in place that sometimes make that very difficult. So it's about aligning policy, regulations and making sure that alignment occurs across all areas of government. The second point that I wanted to make was that Canberra has some unique competitive advantages. And I know that one of your previous speakers touched on this before. But I think from Canberra's point of view, as we approach our centenary, we have some unique opportunities to position ourselves as one of the world's great cities and great national capitals. Apart from the fact that we have three distinct, well, we're not really schizophrenic. How many personalities can you have if you're schizophrenic? Well, we've got three anyway. We're the capital of the AC, a city of 360,000 people who work, play and live here. We're the national capital, which gives us a different persona altogether, and we're the hub to a very vibrant and growing southeast New South Wales region. Canberra also has a number of other significant and distinctive competitive advantages. Our exclusive position as the national capital, our position as the epicentre of public administration and the defence industry, and the massive budgets that come with that in terms of companies moving here to tap into and to tender to provide goods and services. We have a cluster of iconic national, cultural and collecting institutions. We have an unparalleled concentration of leading research and learning institutions, 4 universities, CSIRO, NICTA. We have a unique governance structure as a single jurisdiction city-state, and we have high levels of education in our population, high levels of participation in the workforce. We're early adopters of technology, and we're a particularly well-connected and networked city. If you put all of those together, we actually have the opportunity to join the dots, to bring all of those competitive advantages together and to focus on some of the challenges that are facing us to come up with solutions. Arguably, at the moment, we're not doing enough to exploit these opportunities. And because we're not doing that, we're compromising our ability to be a city that's viable, diverse, self-sustaining, and that can provide its own revenue from things other than land sales, which is what's happening now. I mean, if you look at the majority of our revenue, our own source revenue comes from land sales and from property taxes. That's unsustainable into the future. And unless we diversify and move our industry base, our revenue base, then we're not going to be able to afford the very high level of services that our population demands. We will be in a situation where we'll be expecting champagne and we'll be on beer money. In his presentation to CURF earlier this year, Professor Stephen Dovers spoke about Canberra as being ideal as a national experiment and laboratory for the ecologically sustainable and human desirable development of Australian settlements and landscapes. I agree with him that as a city-state, Canberra is in a unique position and has a strong competitive advantage to be a test bed for innovation and commercialisation, for data gathering and for long-term partnerships. Professor Dovers pointed out that there is a lot happening in Canberra, but it's not connected. I'd like to expand a little on what he said. He mentioned the cluster of internationally renowned research institutions, which has given Canberra a well-deserved reputation for leading-edge research in biodiversity in and around urban settings, bushfire fuel management, urban energy and water management, catchment management and water quality, and urban vegetation and forest, to name but a few. Beyond that, NICTA is researching and developing world-class solutions to a range of problems. Every day in my job, I see companies that are innovative in both their products and processes, everything from green building to recycling to electric bicycles to environmental monitoring. The list goes on. Just in the next 2 weeks, we have 2 lots of business awards, the Canberra Business Point Awards and the Export Awards. The companies that are coming through there are inspirational in what they're doing and how they're approaching it. And it makes you, having read the sort of challenges we've got, it actually makes you very optimistic for our future if we can just set a framework in place in Canberra that will encourage those businesses. Beyond Canberra, from Bega to Goulburn, there's a workforce that is diversifying and driving investment in a wide range of industries. I didn't know this until Minister Crean spoke at our lunch last week, but in Eden Monero is driving unprecedented levels of investment in clean energy. So far, they've received over $1 billion in renewable energy projects in the region. An estimated 2,300 new jobs will be created. Investment is coming from companies like Wind Prospect, which is developing a 120-turbine wind farm near Nimitabel, Dongwa Tasco, which will utilise biomass from its 200 million timber operation in Bombala, AGL with its geothermal project near Nimitabel, and Carnegie Wave Energy. Carnegie, interesting, has just signed an exclusive agreement to supply power to the HMAS Stirling Naval Base in Perth and will launch a test buoy off Eden next year. Other companies who are pioneering the clean energy the future include Pambula Engineering, which is breaking into the export market with interesting and exciting waste harvesting technology, Dysol in Queanbeyan and Solar Store in Cooma. And I can go on. The Monbeef Abattoir in Cooma is looking to take advantage of one of the government's packages to capture and harness methane. Algae Tech is using carbon-hungry algae to produce biofuel. Bega Cheese has 7 projects underway to reduce energy costs. And then we get to ecotourism. I don't know how many of these countries you know, but these are just in Canberra and the region. Real Fun Adventures, Lake Burley Griffin Cruises, the National Zoo and Aquarium, the Australian Reptile Centre, the Bower Luxury Accommodation, the Beachcomber Holiday Park, whale watching tours, Total Eco Adventures, Montague Island, 136, Thredbo Valley Distillery. I don't know if there's anybody here been to Thredbo Valley Distillery. It's an amazing company, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. You should go online and have a look at what they're doing. Gondwana Dreaming and Alpine Habitats. So there is a lot happening out there at the moment, but I don't know how many of you would have been aware of those companies and what they're doing. Very few people would join the dots with all of those and say, okay, how do we pull them together? Interestingly, CURF is doing a project on exactly that, to bring together 3 major tertiary institutions and community leaders with local businesses to collaboratively deal with climate change adaptation and create a resilient future for the region. So CURF is doing a job there. But for most people, I'm hoping RDA is doing something, and CEROC. But there is a lot happening, but we're just not bringing that all together. I think there's an opportunity when people come to Canberra to see our national institutions to actually join them up with some of this ecotourism that's happening in our region. At the moment, we don't do anything with that. You've just got to find it yourself. So my final point is that we have our best chance of meeting the challenges if we do it together. If we are to become a sustainable and carbon neutral city, we will have to do it together: government, research institutions, private sector and the community. The targets we have set, an immediate objective of 40% reduction in greenhouse gas by 2020 and carbon neutrality by 2060, will simply not be reached unless we harness our collective strengths and capabilities. I'll come back again in a minute to Professor Dover's overarching argument, but he's basically saying that we can be an internationally remarkable integrated knowledge system for sustainable development, connecting all of those organisations that I've said before in the Canberra region. That sentiment actually reflects the thrust of a large number of Canberra Business Council's policy documents over the last few years. So the reality is we're all on the same page. It's just that we're beavering away in our silos, doing our own, focused on our own, whether it's academia or business or government or the community. And I don't think we talk enough about how we can work together. The reality is that if we do get our act together, it will enable world-class evidence-based public policy, a shared community understanding, and this is where the business community come from, exportable innovation and ideas. That's really where the council's at the moment, that we have the opportunity with our distinctive competitive advantage to use our innovative businesses to address the problems that we've got. That will enable us to develop new industries, and those industries are industries that if we're fast enough and get our act together, we'll be able to export to the rest of Australia and overseas. What tends to happen sometimes is we take so long in the ACT to get our act together that everybody else has leapfrogged us or, for example, there are companies like HealthCube, for example, which came up with a terrific software system for hospitals but couldn't sell it to the ACT government. So the company was sold twice to other companies and finally was bought by an American company, and our health department bought the software back from the American company. Just today, one of our really good organisations came to us and said that their parent company wants them to move back to Sydney, where they feel there's a bigger market. So we're in a competitive environment in Canberra, and we can't just sit back and think everything will be okay. Particularly the new technologies and the new solutions are moving really quickly, and unless we get out there and make it happen for our city and our region, there'll be other cities and other regions in Australia that will be taking advantage. I just wanted to finalise by just saying a couple of quick things. Canberra in the region, I think, is critically important. And finally, there's a sense that something's coming together, that there is a recognition by the ACT government that we are more than the hole in the donut. I don't know whether you've actually seen the map of the RDAs. Have you seen the map of RDA? So it's the whole of southeast New South Wales, with this little hole in the middle, which is the ACT. Now, I'm yet to see any sort of business or public policy or anything that recognises the line, the invisible line between us and Queanbeyan, or between us and the rest of the region. And finally, I think there is a recognition that we do provide all of those wonderful services to the region: health, education, and a whole lot more. But this has to be a two-way street. It's not about expecting the rest of the region to come to Canberra for our health services and our education. It's about us going out and saying, we can help you provide those at a local area, in your local area. Maybe not with bricks and mortar, but potentially with technology and with all of the other competitive advantages, again, that we have. If you look at what's happened recently, the ACT government signed an MOU with the New South Wales government around the region. The ACT government's involved with CEROC. The Chief Minister made a recent announcement that if re-elected, a Labor government's intention is to establish a ministry for regional development. Now, I could be wrong, but I can't remember that happening before. And what it does is it shows not just a recognition that we are part of a region, but I think from the Chief Minister's point of view, and I'm putting words in her mouth, it recognises that there's a benefit for Canberra in going beyond our borders, and that there's a benefit for the rest of the region in us engaging more with them. We've had an interesting thing. We run a program for the ACT government called Canberra Business Point. So what do you do when a business from Queanbeyan or Murrum-Bateman or Hall or wherever rings up and says, we want to access your services? Now, in the past, the ACT government would have said, you know what, this is ACT taxpayers' money. We can't do that. But, and there's an argument there, you know, should our taxes be going to support businesses and services that are delivered outside of the ACT? On the other hand, if you look at it, in the export awards this year, 3 of the companies are actually companies that are located outside the ACT, but they actually regard themselves as Canberra companies. Most of their exporting, or actually one of them exports through South Australia, but because we don't have a customs port here, but they actually engage in Canberra as if they were Canberra companies. So do we draw a line on a map and say, I'm sorry, you're in Queanbeyan, we can't deal with you? Canberra Business Council has always said, we'll deal with the region. Our members come from Queanbeyan, and I think it's really, it's pleasing to see that the ACT government is moving in that direction as well. Again, I'd like to acknowledge our partnership that we have with RDA ACT. We've got a vested interest because I'm not sure if you're aware, but Craig Sloan, who was the chair of the council, is now the chair of the RDA ACT. You know how incestuous Canberra is. But we've had some terrific events around high-speed rail, and last week with Simon Crean, and I hope that partnership continues. We'd also like to deepen our partnership with CURF, because I think it is very, very important that you have the voice of business in the team. Academics can't do it by themselves, neither can government. So I think we all bring to the table something special, and I think we need to be sitting around that table together. So I just wanted to summarise, given that we're going into the centenary, and it's not just a milestone, it's an opportunity to refocus and identify future opportunities for sustainable growth and regional development. In our view, what this will require is the articulation of a vision for Canberra and the surrounding areas as a sustainable region. It will require building consensus around that vision. In Canberra, you know, that's not an easy thing to do. Just in recent years, I've learned that we have an unusual population here. We have 360,000 planners and urban developers. 360,000 people that, and I'll just make a really quick diversion. When we were doing the work on, or the ACT was doing the work on the gas-fired power station, I was invited to go to one of the community consultations, which was a big mistake because I went and I was the only person from the business community there. Everybody else was from the community, and 99% of them, I was the 100th, were opposed to it. And when we sat at the table, the ACT government, I hope they don't mind me saying this, had made a fatal error of bringing in a consultant from Sydney who assumed that the people at the table knew nothing. And there were 5 tables of people there, and they arrived with folders that were this thick. And at the table that I sat at, there were 2 very high-ranking public servants. There was a person who had donated their time free of charge and headed up a large PR company and knew exactly how to lobby government. And as you went round the table, I actually felt sorry for the consultant, because they started off by saying, now, we need to be civilised here tonight. I mean, these were really, really qualified people who knew more about what was going on than anybody else. So it's not always easy in Canberra to get a consensus. I think we need to spend more time over a much longer period to show people in Canberra what the future can hold, that it's not all bad. It doesn't have to be 20-storey buildings, you know, next to their quarter-acre block, that there is a future out there that will be better for all of us if we have good transport systems, if we have a community that is sustainable as we go into the impacts of climate change. So we definitely need some sort of consensus. I would argue that we need leadership. I think leadership is, and governments never like to hear you say that, but I don't just think, I'm not just talking about leadership in government, I'm talking about leadership in academia, hence, you know, the importance of CURF, in the business community, in government, and in the community itself. I think we require people, or we need people that will stand up and be counted and talk about the issues, even when you sort of get hammered. In fact, I noticed one of your earlier, I don't think it was yours, Will. Oh, it was your speech, and I was looking at the commentary on the website, and, you know, bollocks and bullshit and all this sort of thing. And I thought, you know, you've really got to stand up and say what is the case. No doubt mine will be there tomorrow. The next thing I think we need is investment in enabling infrastructure. I have a personal view, I'm taking my Canberra Business Council hat off. Without an efficient public transport system, I don't think we can do what we need to do in Canberra. I think people, and I'm not talking about just buses. How many people came here tonight, public transport? 1. This would be every single, I ask the same question, don't I, Robert, at every meeting I go to. How many people come by public transport? And it's not about cost, it's actually about timeliness and convenience. And until we can get that right, I don't think people are going to make the modal shift to public transport. And the reason I think that, you know, it's worthwhile looking hard at light rail is that when you've got a fixed line like that, providing we can get the regularity of the services, we might be able to start that movement. My son lives in Melbourne, in Port Melbourne. I never take my car in Melbourne. I catch the light rail from, I don't do this in Canberra, but in Melbourne, I get on the light rail if I'm going to the city, or I catch a tram or a bus wherever I'm going. If we go to the football in Melbourne, we catch the public transport system, and within 20 minutes of the end of the game, everyone's gone. Now, until we can invest, and it is a big investment, particularly when people are so wedded to their cars and we're so spread out, but unless we invest in that sort of infrastructure, I think we're always going to be dragging the chain. We need to invest in ICT infrastructure, in high-speed rail, which is a passion of ours. I think high-speed rail is going to be the game changer for this region, without any doubt. I noticed today that the New South Wales government has come out and said it's not on their priority list, it's not in their transport plan, it's not anywhere. But for the southeast region and for Canberra, right through to Melbourne and right up to Brisbane, I think that is going to be the game changer of this century if we can just bite the bullet. Canberra Business Council, this is our third go at supporting this. Again, you'd think we'd learn and give up, but it really is very important. There are other pieces of infrastructure that we think are important: a new convention centre, Canberra Airport, investment in education and training, and a whole range of others. We need an integrated response to climate change, and I don't think that's happening. I think you've got really good people out there talking about it. You've got a large part of the business community just put their head in the sand at the moment because not because they don't believe in it and they don't know that there are opportunities, but they just don't know what to do. We need governments to remove silos and fragmentation and ensure alignment of policy objectives and regulations. We thought with the Hawke Review of the public sector that when we came down from 21 agencies to 7, that would happen. But it actually hasn't happened. Let me give you an example. Just 10 minutes ago, we've got a restaurant in Manuka that's in a heritage building and they want to renovate. So they go to ACPLA and get the plans approved. The laws say that if you renovate, if your renovation is more than 15% of the building, then you have to comply with all of the new regulations, including disability toilets. Unfortunately, for this restaurant, to get a disability toilet, they have to knock down a wall, but the Heritage Department says you can't do that, it's a heritage building. So they're basically being pushed between three sections of a directorate saying, you tell us what you want. Do you want the heritage to take precedence? Do you want the disability toilets to take precedence? What do you want? And so we just have to remove some of these silos and get the directorates talking to each other with an objective or an overarching policy, and then make the regulations support that. We need long-term strategic planning. And I think that is, as you heard from what Francis said, I had actually 13 years in Parliament House as a senior advisor, and it is almost impossible to get politicians to have a long-term perspective on something. At least in the ACT, we've got 4 years, which is slightly better than the 2.5 or 3 that they have at a federal level. But unless we have long-term strategic planning, unless we can say we're going to do light rail or high-speed rail or whatever, over the next 10 years, all we keep doing is putting it off. And I've just come across I love this phrase from Stephen Dover's, ad hocery and amnesia. I thought that was spectacular, because what happens is there's a bit of pressure put on government. They put out some sort of a report. There's a lot of work done on it, a lot of consultation, and then for some reason it just sits there and there's amnesia about what was in it or what happened. So I've put that on my favourite sayings things. And apart from the long-term strategic planning, we need long-term partnerships, and I think that's what CURF's about. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chris. There's a lot to think about and talk about in that. Let's open it up. We do have time for a few questions before we adjourn and have more informal discussion over wine and something to eat, but let's open it up now for some questions from the floor.
Look, I think one of the advantages we have here is that we're pretty connected. It's easy. You can ring somebody up and go and have a talk with them. You can. It's not like Sydney, where there are layers and layers of bureaucracy and other things. But I don't think we have the model yet for sparking, if you like, that connection. The Digital City project, or proposal, which Canberra Business Council put to government, and government's actually sort of taken it up, but they've moved it in a slightly different direction. It was actually meant to do exactly that, to just spark it. So you would come up with, for example, a problem. And I'll give you my favourite example, which has got nothing to do with climate change, really, but I really, really hate those parking machines where you've got to put 20 cents in. You get to there, you haven't got any change in your purse. It won't take 50-cent coins. It only gives you a small amount anyway. Why don't we have Swipe? Why don't we have some, an app for our phone or a credit card thing where you could just swipe it? Other places do. So the Digital City proposal was about coming up with any sort of problem or whatever, something seeking a solution, and put it out there and say to anybody, any small business, come forward with your ideas about how we might find a solution to this problem. And then the idea was that there would be a very small sort of financial prize, which would enable that company, when it won, to develop a business case and to whatever. But the real investment, the next stage, was about making sure that you had a customer, an investor, potentially some investment or some contribution from government, but not a grant, not something that comes from government. So there's no point in business sitting out there waiting for government to give them a handout. And you'd be surprised how many start-up businesses are out there They come to us and say, where can I get some money, you know, to basically to make them profitable? And we say, that's not what business is about. But we do need to connect the research. So, for example, you might say, I don't know, something to do with climate change, that there's an issue there that has been researched in academia, and they know that we need a solution in a particular thing. You could put that out as well. And apart from that sort of model, the only thing that I think, the only other thing on the shelf at the moment is that we just increase the number of forums like this where people can talk. We do quite a lot at the council with some of our innovative companies, and we're just talking at the moment about with the government about a shared space, which is like an incubator where companies that are really innovative would rent a desk for a day or a week or a month or whatever. But we really need to get going with that sort of connection. And I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think we've got to do all of it. Yeah. And there's just one other point in what you made. We need to get our IP organised. Where there's a problem sometimes with universities is they want to hang on to the IP. No, I know. If you look at what happens with places like Google, they actually let their staff, for a certain number of hours or a day a week, work on their own innovations. And we need to get to a point where if you're developing something, you don't have to hand over the IP to somebody else, that you can share it or that you can have lifetime use or you know, payrolls or something, but that you actually are encouraged to do it. Otherwise, why would you? You know, why would you, in academia, why would you do it? And even in the private sector, what we're finding with a lot of the incubator type things is the investors are taking 50% of the IP when they invest. And so the companies are saying, you know what, by the time I give a bit more to the other people as I get a bit further down the track, there's nothing left in it for me. And then I lose control of the company. So we really need to say, are we about hanging on to IP particularly, and the government's the other one that does it, they hang on to the IP, it sits on a shelf until it's out of use, and then, or are we about developing this really innovative community where we can come up with ideas and commercialise them, export them, and you know, really get going? I think this is just coming from the business community. One of the things that I'm surprised at constantly is the mismatch between the expectations from government of what business can afford to pay and the belief in business, rightly or wrongly, of what they want to pay if they're going to keep doing it. So what happens with businesses, as I said, often they don't just jump up and down, but they do their figures and they say, you know what, there's not enough, given all the risks and everything else, there's not enough profit in that for me to do that. And so they go and do something else. So it's a really fine line. I actually think there needs to be some value capture. And if you look at what's happening in China and in some other countries in overseas, they're actually paying for their high-speed rail out of their value capture. Now, they've got much bigger populations. We're looking at vast areas where there's nothing, so no one's really going to want to buy the land. But certainly in areas in Canberra, I would, you know, and I'm biased, I would be sitting down with the business community, with the people who are going to develop those sites and say to them, okay, you know, this has to be a fair go. It's not you taking all the profit, it's not us taking all the profit. Where's the line? What would be the tipping point? And what's happening with the lease variation charge now is that they're just not infilling the way we should. We've got a 50% target of infill. It's not happening. Well, if you're looking at the big end of town, they absolutely get it. They actually know that as we move, you know, into the next decade, their properties will be more valuable if they've got the higher ratings. They know that absolutely. And so you look at a Nishi building, which is an 8-star. You look at, and that's just the beginning of where it's going. All of the big developers get it. The problem you've really got is not when they're building big buildings, because there aren't many buildings happening at the moment. The real problem you've got with energy efficiency is in the small businesses. So if you look at the fact that we've got about 25,000 businesses in Canberra, 96% of them have less than 20 employees. So the majority of businesses are really small and they're not efficient. But I say this often to groups when I'm talking to them. If you look at what happens to a small business, it might be a mum and dad or a mum and dad and a couple of other people. At the moment, they've got pressure on them to employ older workers. They've got pressure on them to employ women returning to the workforce, to employ people with a disability, to go down a healthy workplace initiative, which the ACT government's got, to do the energy efficiency things. Now, most of these businesses, particularly if they're in the retail area, are just struggling to find the customers, to buy their goods, to pay the bills, and to live their life. So when you say to them, you should be using more, you should be more energy efficient, I think what we've got to do as a community is develop a mechanism to get into that business without any stress or any, carry on, and show them how to do it. And if you're asking them to read vast, lots of documents or to turn up to things like this, they won't come because they're already working 7 days a week and then they're doing their paperwork at night. So very few of them, as I said, I deal with them all the time, and it's like herding cats because they're busy in the retail sector. They're not even paying their bills at the moment. A lot of them have got rid of staff because they can't afford it. And so their thought, it's like the sort of hierarchy of need. They're way down the bottom. Now, that's not all businesses, but what I'm saying is if we want to move this, we've got to make it simple. And I use the example of the plastic bags that we all got at the supermarket. I know there's a bit of a kerfuffle out there at the moment from the Liberal Party, but we contacted a whole lot of supermarkets in Canberra and said to them when it was introduced, how do you feel about this? We didn't get one complaint. And the reason we didn't get a complaint is they said there was a long lead time in, they were given a lot of information, people came and visited them and said, this is what you need to do. They were given time to source alternate bags. And so in the end, it wasn't a big hassle for them. What we do now, though, is we pass a massive piece of legislation that's aimed at a large company with heaps of regulations. The small businesses don't get time to read it. They don't really know what's going on. Workplace health and safety. Again, the meeting that I was at now, the businesses, because they haven't got time to go out and check the ergonomics of the people, they just say to their staff, you can't work from home anymore. Now that's, in an environment where we're supposed to be doing flexible workplaces and home working, it's ridiculous. So we've got to make it easy for small businesses. But as I said, big businesses, they get it. They absolutely get it. And they're doing fantastic stuff out there at the moment.